Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera, greetings and kia ora. Thank you very much first and foremost on behalf of Matriculation Divisions, Ministry of Education. We would like to express our gratitude to University of Canterbury for the long withstanding relations and cooperation with us. University of Canterbury is one of the top university in New Zealand which recognize matriculation programs as entry to their degree courses. UC is located at the heart of Christchurch on the South Island of New Zealand, and it has long traditions and history founded on 1873. For your information, this video session is part of Matriculation's Lecturers Professionalism Development course, which will be held on 19 October till 4th of November 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed with the special talks from our outstanding speakers from University of Canterbury, allow me to introduce our speaker biodata for today. It is an honor for us to have Dr. Stuart Wise from University of Canterbury. I'll share you a little bit about his biodata. He has qualifications and memberships. He has a merit and varied qualifications, including Bachelor of Music from University of Otago, Diploma in Education Administration, Christchurch College of Education, and he also had Master of Education from University of Tasmania, and now Doctor of Philosophy, University of Canterbury. And he also is member of International Society for Music Education. So if you look at his qualification, he had a mix of musical and educational certificate. So it is a nice combination to have such a well-experienced lecturers on board today. And if we look at his research paper before this, he had a lot of research is done in music technology, use of software package in secondary music classes, pedagogical approaches, and students, teachers' perception of ICT in music educations, and initial teacher education in 21st century, secondary school curriculum in 21st century. So the fields of research that he's doing right now is actually is matched and absolutely match our purpose of having these courses today is to create a new environment for new educations in Malaysia. Okay, and one thing that I would like to quote from his CV here is the last part here. I am also interested in initial teacher educations, ITE, with a focus on how we work to prepare beginning teachers for the challenges of working with young people in 21st century. As part of this inquiry, I'm interested in looking at the concept of curriculum in the 21st century and how we teach young people to ensure cultural competency, inclusions, resilience, and a desire to become lifelong learners. The last part here, okay, this is absolutely what we are looking for in our courses this 3 weeks time, because we are looking forward to have sharing of ideas in regards of learnings, lifelong learnings, especially for the young lecturers in matriculation colleges. So without further ado, I wish to call Dr. Stuart Wise, which is now working as Associate Dean for University of Canterbury, to share his experience, his knowledge in today's course. Thank you very much, Doctor, for having us here today. Good morning, Doctor.
Yes, good morning. So kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou, ko Stuart Wise aho, no te whare wananga o Waitaha Tokowingoa, and no mai hara mai tēnei hui, and salamat pagi. So first, I'd just like to say what a great pleasure it is for me to be able to present and work with you, Mr. Zul. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I am very grateful. I would just like to say that I have just modelled a little bit of my own bicultural competence by using Te Reo Māori, which is one of the official languages of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And one of the things that we are increasingly aware of with our teaching in education right across our country is the necessity to be culturally competent. We are an increasingly multicultural society, but we have a very firm bicultural foundation. And I am committed to ensure that I acknowledge those, our Indigenous peoples. And again, one of the things that I admire about Malaysia has been how well your government has supported Malay and the cultures within which you work. So it's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to be able to work with you today. So and again, thank you very much for the introduction. I would just like to tell the people who will be watching this that fundamentally I remain a teacher. I was a high school teacher for 15 years, and I started my postgrad study because I wanted to be a high school principal. So my master's degree is in education administration. And in fact, as part of that qualification, I was very privileged to actually go on an overseas study tour to Malaysia, where we visited the Institute Amanuddin Baki, which was the principal's training centre up in the Highlands. The Genting Highlands? Do you say Genting or Genting?
Yeah, Genting Highlands.
Genting Highlands, yes. That's a heck of a road up that mountain, I've got to tell you. I've not forgotten the bus trip to the top. But it was wonderful to have a glimpse into your wonderful country. And we were fortunate enough to be able to travel to Penang, down to Malacca, and also across to Kuching. And in recent years, I've had a couple of trips into Malaysia, and I must say, I remember back in the day, it was the Vision 2020. Well, my word, what amazing strides your country has made in the time. I visited in the 90s and then came back later, and enormous credit to your government and to your people. And I must say, when I was in Malaysia in 2018, the hospitality that I received was second to none. So it is a great pleasure to be able to help. So as I said, I was a high school teacher. My master's is in Ed Leadership and Management. I was fortunate enough to be able to work in tertiary teaching when I was working in tertiary, where I was working with people who were teaching students who were not successful in New Zealand schools. And in some ways, they were teachers who were teaching kids that I could not connect with. And that was very valuable for me because it gave me an insight into their world. And much of what they were saying, and I learned at that time, I have taken into my own teaching. Now, I had a wee bit of a circuitous route from there back into secondary teacher education, but I've been working in that space since 2000. And we are very aware at our university of the challenges we are now facing with our younger students coming through, but also with our younger staff members. And I guess, I've now been working for our university in our College of Education for 23 years. So I guess the benefit experience sort of kicks in, but I still have an enormous pleasure working with beginning teachers. And the strategies that we use in education for high school, many of those are now transferring across into the tertiary context. So the first thing I would like to say is that I am a technology enthusiast. I am a person who is looking to the future and acknowledging that the rate of change in the 21st century is exponential. And whether we like it or not, we can't hold back that tide. If you like to use the metaphor, the genie is out of the bottle. And I guess the current context in which the world finds itself with COVID is a really good example. All of a sudden, in a university like ours, we were shut down. I was working from home. I had to teach on Zoom. And that meant that I had to have a whole lot of different strategies, which all of a sudden I was almost making up on the hoof. But I've been very fortunate that I have colleagues around me who are very good at teaching online. And in our particular School of Teacher Education, in our university, we have been offering teacher education by distance for many years. So we had a good background of sound pedagogical approaches in our work. Now, Mr. Zoll, tell me if I'm speaking too quickly, because I'll get enthusiastic. It's good? Thank you so much, sir. And I, to be adaptable is really important. So I'm going to throw a phrase at you right now for the people who are watching this, which I'm going to come back to quite a lot. And it's one of the things that we teach our beginning teachers about. But even for us as university academics, we should be trying to foster this in any of the professions in which you are teaching, be it engineering, being in science, being it in the arts, being in social sciences. And that's that concept of ensuring that our graduates have the skills to demonstrate adaptive expertise. And I'm going to come back to that term a lot more. And by what I mean by that really is the ability to be flexible, the ability to be able to understand a concept and to be able to use it in a different context. So it is one thing to be able to have the knowledge and possibly to be able to repeat the knowledge, but it is another thing entirely to be able to use that in different circumstances and to be flexible in your thinking. So that is really, really important. And when I'm working with our graduates, when we're kind of scoping curriculum and approaches to curriculum and more future thinking, it has always intrigued me that in education, we still have people who constantly say, oh, people are missing out on the basics. You have to go back to the basics. And whilst those basics of foundation, yes, sure, remain, we have to move with the times. And a really good example, which I'm directly connected with through my family, is medicine, because my wife is a medical practitioner. And the advances in medicine in the last 20 or 30 years have been dramatic. And you only need to look at something like coronary artery disease, that 15 to 20 years ago, people would be having major open heart surgery to repair coronary artery disease. And now, using catheters in through wrists, they can insert stents into people's hearts with a minimal invasive procedure. It can be done in 20 minutes. And, it worries me sometimes that us in education, and particularly working in tertiary, we have people who have never considered changing their practice. The view is it's always been done this way, so therefore this is the way. And I would challenge you to think about that, because the context in which the students that you people working as lecturers may be meeting could be very different now to what it was in the past. So what I'm going to do now is just do a quick share screen. I was just saying before, I have multiple screens, so hopefully I'll work this out. Like one of the things in the key shifts in the 21st century has been that idea of knowledge economy transformation from industrial to knowledge economies. And that is certainly something that's happened in New Zealand. And Malaysia, of course, has been a benefactor of this change because you've been able to provide the cheaper labour for many of the products. But, we are seeing knowledge as being a central driving force. And again, that point that I've made there, the relocation of economic activities to different regions of the world has forced a reskilling. And just in the same way as you've got big industrial plants in Malaysia, you will need people with skills in that space. In other countries in the world, those traditional workers who were there now have to come back and work on something else. And again, it's that concept of lifelong learning. And I think we now accept that for the young people we work with now, in my generation, for me, I saw teaching as a job for life. But many of our younger people will move between particular skills. And again, I come back to that phrase I mentioned before, the concept of adaptive expertise. So, with the concept of lifelong learning being in there, and you'll see that the phrase adaptive expertise is now emerging here, we have to be aware that lifelong learning is the ability to continuously develop over one's lifespan, being essential so citizens are able to access the requisite resources and support and to learn the content and competencies they need. And that is fundamental with that whole concept of adaptive expertise. So it's what I guess, just reinforcing that it's the meaningful learned knowledge and skills, and you've got to use those flexibly and creatively in a variety of contexts and situations. So to put that in a tertiary context, yes, the students need to have the knowledge and the content, but it is one thing to be able to regurgitate it, to be able to answer an exam paper, and that's fine. But the next level is to say, okay, yes, I know that. And what's more important now is I know how to use it. And even though the context might be slightly different here, I know what the principles are and I have the skills to be able to transfer that across. So I think that is really fundamental here. So that's where we're going through there. And here are some of those things which we're talking about, around those higher order thinking skills, which we now need our graduates to be able to cope with. Okay. And that means within the workplace, they've got to be able to generate, process, and sort complex information. Systematical and critical thinking are essential. And I think more than anything else, that whole ability to think critically is really important. We notice this at our university, particularly in our postgrad situations. Sometimes when we're working with international students, they find it quite difficult to adapt to our requirements for more critical thinking, because they are used to what I mentioned before. They are very good students. They learn the material. They regurgitate the material to meet the exam questions. But they've been told that that's what they have to do, and that's how you demonstrate your knowledge. Where for us, we often think that it's great to know that, but also on top of that, to question, am I actually being told the right stuff? Is it actually the case for everybody? How does it change if I'm in a different set of circumstances? And again, that's where I'm circling back to that concept of adaptive expertise. So I think that's one of the things that we're very aware of. And I guess it would be something that I guess I'd ask you to challenge your thinking yourself when you are teaching these students. Am I actually developing critical thinkers? Knowing that there is a fundamental body of knowledge that they need, but part of how we evolve knowledge is to critique and question. And those are some of the things that I think are really important. And part of that then comes into the next part there, which is make decisions about weighing different forms of evidence is really important. Asking meaningful questions, adaptable and flexible, being creative, being able to justify and solve real world problems. It's that transference of knowledge. And again, back to that concept of adaptive expertise being really, really important. The ability to acquire a deep understanding of complex concepts. Back to the critical thinking, back to the adaptive expertise. And I think now you're probably seeing where I'm going with this. And this is sort of big picture stuff, and I'll come round to some of the more fine-grained detail a bit later on in this discussion. Media literacy is important. Goodness knows, in our country and probably in yours, social media has had a huge impact. And of course, in the COVID context, our country has had to have a look at a lot of some very strange postings about COVID, but social media is enormously powerful. And, how we actually manage that, because of course happens to me. I can be teaching, with my graduates, and they've got their devices with them, and they'll look at something, and sometimes they'll challenge me. Oh, but it says such and such here. And that's fine, and I don't mind that. Actually, it can be quite good when I forget stuff because I ask them to look it up for me. But sometimes, what they read on the internet actually isn't necessarily correct. In fact, in many cases, it isn't. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. It's that kind of challenge there. And of course, the ability for teamwork, social, and communication skills. So, and again, these are really, really important. And I've been privileged here to work with a group of engineers who are very clever people, very capable, highly skilled in their area, but completely unable to work in a team because they're so used to working individually. And then as part of that, have lacked the communication skills to actually talk to their clients. I'm fortunate to have a brother-in-law who's an engineer, and he said to me, tell those people they need to be able to write a report for a client in a language that their grandmother can understand. And again, I'm back to that concept of adaptive expertise. You adapt for the context you need. You know the knowledge, but knowing it sometimes is a way of depowering it in a way that it has a greater understanding from a bigger group. So that's pretty important. So, those are some of the things. This is part of the overview that I'm looking at here. So with that in mind then, just coming down to the next level, is first of all, what we are aware of now in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is recognising that learners have to be at the centre. And that you'll see down there, you have to recognise those individual differences. And one size does not fit all. And just because you may have a student who appears not to be able to answer an exam paper wouldn't necessarily guarantee that they don't know the content. They just may not have the skill to be able to answer it in that traditional form of assessment. So having the opportunity to have a range of different assessments, which may include an oral discussion, or it may have a form of a presentation, or mix it up in more project-based work, is really important. And certainly in our teacher education qualification, we do not have exams. Our students are viewed when they're on practicum. Our students do a lot of assignment work and group project work, but a traditional 2 or 3 hour paper which they write never happens. And that's been a change. Certainly for many of those students in their undergraduate qualifications, that may be the case. But you match your assessment approach and strategies to what you're doing. So we don't feel that matches best for us. We have to acknowledge that emotions are integral to learning. And I would challenge you all to think about whether you can learn when you're scared. I certainly can't. And being intimidated by a lecturer can be quite challenging. It certainly did happen to me in my undergraduate qualification back in the day. And I have not forgotten that feeling of feeling like an imposter and being completely inadequate. And yet, I'm not stupid. I mean, well, some people might say I am, but I don't think I am. And I do have a PhD to prove it. But it's sometimes, and I am joking here, but it is, to have a lecturer who is, just humiliates people is not okay. And look, I'm sure that's not the case. But again, it was a generational thing. I mean, here I am at age 62, reminiscing on times when I was 21. I mean, it's over 40 years ago. But I had one particular lecturer at music school who just took delight in humiliating us. And I know my wife said that when she was at medical school. She had some males, unfortunately, who did the same to her, to the point where she nearly left medicine. And now my wife is one of the she is the most senior clinician at our hospital here in Christchurch. So, don't forget about that. that concept there of stretching all students is really important as well. You've got to have high expectations, but to have those high expectations, it's also really very important that you give the students the confidence that they can take risks and take chances. And I think that is really important as well. When I am teaching, even in a big lecture of over 100 students, I move around, I pass the microphone round, I ask questions, I get the students to ask questions, I get them to talk to each other. That's the social aspect of it, and just try to lighten the mood a bit. But also say to them that I have high expectations of them. Now, again, because I tend to work with graduates, I keep saying to them, hey, you guys are clever, you got degrees, you know what you're doing. Back yourselves. Just in the same way, if you've got people coming out of high school, hey, look, you've done really well here. Back yourself, be confident, have a go. And fear of failure and fear of making a mistake, you can see where that's connected to that whole concept of emotions being integral to learning. So I think that's really important as well. And that's certainly one of the things that I do there. So yes, do have high standards and do have high expectations, because it's just the same when you're teaching. If you have high expectations for your students and you are, consistent with that message with them, giving them the confidence, creating an environment where they can take chances, they will succeed. You've got to use assessment effectively to guide learning. Because, in the end, how do you possibly know what they've done if you're not using effective assessment processes? And one of the things that I do with my smaller workshop classes, at the end of every 2 or 3 hour workshop, I will get the students simple like, tell me one thing you know now that you didn't know at the start. Or tell me one thing that really surprised you in our session today that you hadn't thought about. Because as soon as you do those kinds of things, yes, you're checking that they are, reflecting on the material you've covered. But also that acts as a prompt to the others. And I think, oh, I didn't think of that. And that sparks their thinking process. So again, it's a very active process which I enjoy working with. And above all else, and this does underpin my teaching philosophy, but also very much the whole of the New Zealand education system now and a part of our curriculum, is that social constructivist approach. Find out what the students know, make connections. I'm forever saying to, even with our teacher education grads, make it real for students. Again, back to adaptive expertise. You know the concept, you've got the knowledge, and often I've always said the best way to truly prove that you know something is to teach it to somebody else. It's to be able to do that in multiple contexts. And I saw with one of the students that unfortunately was not successful with us in our program, this particular person was someone working with mathematics. And it was very clear to us that they knew the math from a formula level only. It was like they had memorized how to solve particular equations. They had memorized the basics of algebra. They'd memorized approaches to calculus. And when they were trying to teach it, they were unable to be able to do it any other way than the way they wrote on the whiteboard. And I thought, they don't actually have a deep understanding of how this works. They just had what I would call a surface understanding. And again, it's back to what I said before, that adaptive expertise. That particular person had no way that they could make the material that they knew real for the students they are working with. And when a student said, I don't understand what you've done, they couldn't think of a different way in which to teach it. So again, that's that idea of trying to make it real, adaptive expertise, those kinds of concepts are really important. So I hope that kind of gives you a bit of an idea what I'm talking about there. So I'll just stop that screen share and jump back, and I'm going to pop up another one if that's okay, sir. And I've just going to have to escape for a second. Oh dear, I could get myself in strife here. I've got too many screens. Let me just see. And I want to go. Let's just have a look at a couple of these with these. Oops, it disappeared on me. There we go. So these are some of the things that I'll just go very quickly through this. But certainly it's just reinforcing what I was saying about a much stronger teacher-centered approach. And traditional instructional methods like rote learning, memorization, convergent thinking, often influenced by text, used to be dominant. And certainly it was when I was in the university in the late 70s and early 80s. But we've now got a greater emphasis on discovery learning, problem solving, divergent thinking, those kinds of things. Divergent thinking there, I include critical thinking. But certainly cooperative learning, peer teaching, and project-centered learning is very much what we now model, even in our undergraduate programs here at our university, and it's right across the board. Okay. So even though you are even in a formal lecture situation, you're still using those kinds of approaches. So I'm just going to quickly run through that concept of constructivism because I mentioned it before, hence we're in this particular space. And it is a worldview that espouses learning as active, and people construct their own understandings of key concepts. And it's a very interesting little exercise for my generation if I ask people to describe a phone, because growing up for me, a phone was a little sort of shaped box and it had a circular dial on the front. Now we still, I don't know if you do in Malaysia and New Zealand, we still talk about dialing a number, but we don't actually do it because these days we have mobile phones and we tap in a number. It's kind of interesting. And we say that our phone rings. Well, for many of us, it doesn't. We have some interesting ringtones. I know my wife prefers the standard phone ringing, whereas the musician in me actually uses a song by Led Zeppelin. But that's just because I'm an old rock and roller. But, it's funny how we construct that. So, if you have an age, a range of people, say from age 10 through to age 70, and you talk about the concept of a phone, everybody knows actually what, the basics of the phone, the concept of picking something up, hearing one part of it and speaking in the other. But what your 70-year-old might construct as a phone versus what your 10-year-old may construct as a phone is completely different, even though the concepts remain the same. So again, that's something to think about. So, knowledge is constructed based on personal experience and the hypotheses of environment. And learners do constantly test those through social negotiation. And again, thinking from a learner-centered perspective, when you're teaching a large group, being able to richen up your discussion to connect into what each one, their own constructions, makes a lot more sense. So, everybody does have a different interpretation. But, to try to be as inclusive as possible means you actually have to richen up what you're talking about and give a range of examples. So I've kind of included that in there in that slide around a learner-centered approach. I've talked about the different perspectives or frames of reference. We do know that people have different learning styles. I tend not to talk about the visual, oral or kinesthetic, because that to me is a bit simple. If people are interested in that, I'm much more of a fan of the multiple intelligences theory. Howard Gardner, Project Zero out of Harvard University in the States in the early 2000s, where he talks a range of intelligences in particular areas that we are strong in. And for me, for example, as you've probably worked out as a musician and somebody who still plays a lot of music, my musical intelligence is very high. It's one of those things that for whatever reason I have always had a real aptitude for. I'm actually pretty good in the science space and also very good with English literature, but math is an area that I struggle in, and it's not something that I'm particularly strong in. It's quite handy being somebody in a musician because, basically we count to 2, 3, 4, and 6 on a good day. That's how music kind of works. Um, and I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is, for me, I struggle with mathematics at school. I was very fortunate. I had a fantastic math teacher who was very patient with me. And I still was able to end high school and pass that final math test. Whereas my wife just loves mathematics and statistics and those kinds of things. And she's also very good in languages, not so strong in music, although she loves music. So, we do have different sort of areas. So hence, I talk about the Howard Gardner thing there. But I think that final point is really, really important here. And that's learning is a process that occurs best when what is being learned is relevant and meaningful to the learner, when the learner is actively engaged in creating his or her own knowledge and understanding by connecting what is being learned with prior knowledge and experience. There's the constructivist thing there. You've got to make those connections. There is the way that you'll keep them engaged. You've got to make it real. And again, this, I'm circling back to that whole concept of adaptive expertise. You've got to make things real for them in their particular context. So that's going through there. Implications for teaching. I've mentioned this before, but I'm just going to follow up with this. Even in a university environment, learning occurs best when the environment has positive interpersonal relationships and interactions. One in which the learner feels appreciated, acknowledged, respected, and validated. And again, back to what I said before about emotion being integral in successful teaching and learning. I absolutely will maintain you don't learn when you're scared. So that is something for you to think about. So and I mean, this is hard. I'm not going to make, sugarcoat this. In a big lecture, if you've got, 100 odd students, to have a relationship with them can be really challenging. But for me, I've found being authentic, being open, talking directly to the students, making a bit of an effort to try to understand them a bit, passing the microphone around if I've got a mobile mic, so they can talk back with me, just being a bit more open rather than just focusing on content, actually demonstrating your humane side, I guess. And I think that's important. And to recognize that learning is seen as a fundamentally natural process. And we have to, recognize that learners should be naturally curious and basically interested in learning about and mastering their world. And again, I can't talk about the context of what you may be working in or who you're actually teaching. But I have been working with one of my colleagues here in Christchurch who's on sabbatical from Japan, and we did a special program for a group of English language teachers, and Sean was very useful because he understood the context these people had. They were from Asia, teaching English, where you had some very highly motivated students, but also some other students who were just going there because they had to get those credits for that course. And strategies to try to engage them. And as he said, it still goes back to what is up in that first point, positive interpersonal relationships, the interactions, and trying to make, even though, acknowledge, hey, look, I know you don't necessarily want to be here, but I am here to help you. And if you make an effort, we're going to be able to get through this together. It's that good, positive attitude which makes a difference. So that's that one, and I'll see if I can find my way around again to where I was before. So again, Mr. Zool, I'm just trying to get my mouse back to PowerPoint, and I'm just going to shut a couple down here. And that one, but if I open that again, and I have one other, which is this one here. Right, I'll just pop that over here, and I'm going to go back here, and it's that one there. I've got this time. How's it looking? Did that come up straight away?
Yep, it's on.
Oh, I know. Look, I tell you, see, adaptive expertise. I'm learning quickly. And I'll just start that show. I should have practiced this. I'm embarrassed, actually, but never mind. Okay, so let's just have a look at this. And again, I'm just building on the two previous PowerPoints that I'm working through there. And this now has come from a research base. And again, this is something that we've talked about. Sean and I talked about this in ways that even when he's working, Sean works in Japan, that much of this resonated really strongly with him when he's working with his students. So there's that concept of choice, trusted decisions, and taking responsibility for their own learning. Again, reinforcing the task provided, it must be valued by the students and not seen as busy work or trivial. But also the student must have a reasonable probability of success. That concept of stretching that I had in the first PowerPoint presentation. But also you as a lecturer saying to them, you can do this. I'm here to help you. The material we're going to get through, you're clever, you have to be to get where you are now, so we can do this. So there's that probability of success. There's that thing around interconnected knowledge, and that is where we're at with the constructivism, social constructivism as well. A powerful knowledge base is complex, but it's built on those accessible interconnections. And those accessible interconnections are the constructivist approach there, making it real for them, connecting in what they know. And that's followed in by the second bullet point there. Build on the known, make use of their existing knowledge, and emphasize those connections between key things, because this is going to help them with the adaptive expertise. And again, these points should infuse teaching, whatever the particular teaching activity. So I again challenge people who may be watching this to think about that in their own work. Knowledge constructed through learner activity and interaction. The fact of being generally active in and of itself provides general alertness. Activity specifically connected to the learning outcomes of a course using different ways of looking at things via UDL. Now, look, I'll come back to that concept of UDL now. That stands for Universal Design for Learning. And I've chosen deliberately not to go down this particular road today, because that in itself would be something that I would spend almost 3/4 of an hour on. But there is a lot of information, clips available on YouTube describing how UDL works. And it's particularly a way of planning where you are thinking about not presenting things just by text base or by PowerPoint. It's about a way of trying to think of multiple ways that you connect with a range of different learners in your groups, so that everybody is able to pick up on those key concepts. I would be quite happy to come back and revisit that at some stage, Mr. Zool, if you wanted, because that may be helpful at another time. But I really do recommend Universal Design for Learning. In the last 3 or 4 years here within our teacher education program, we have now infused UDL through much of what we do when we're working with our undergraduates and graduates. And it really does reinforce that whole concept of being inclusive. It meets so many ranges of learning styles. So it's very important. But the principles that I've covered earlier on in this discussion with you are actually part of it. Okay. The sort of things that I've talked about, student-centered, a range of ways of approaching things, using constructivism, richening up the environment, thinking about adaptive expertise, they're all connected with UDL. Okay, and now, this is really important. And that whole concept of formative feedback is really very, very useful. And I think in a university context, we don't do enough of this. We certainly are very we put an enormous amount of emphasis with our students when they're teaching themselves, but often we don't necessarily make the connections with our students in front of us. In other words, they tend to be very passive. They just sit there. And again, if we don't talk with them, we don't get the understanding where they're at. So, and look, a lot of this work, if people are interested in following through on this, is from John Hattie, who used to be at Auckland University of Auckland, is now at Melbourne, and he's written extensively on the classroom context. But he made the point with feedback that we have some students who will go to school, and in the entire day, a teacher will never talk to them. They're not, they're perfectly adequate students. They get in there, they do their work, but at no stage do they ever get any feedback on what they're actually doing. They just sort of fly under the radar the whole time. And, he makes the point that you need to engage, and everybody in a class should receive some feedback, at least 1 or 2 times incidents in a particular stage. So, that is one of the most important things that supports good learning, is that formative feedback. For feedback to be effective, students need to be clearly aware of what they are supposed to be learning. So for us, and I do this with my grads, at the start of each lesson, I tell them exactly what we're going to be covering in the lesson. Okay, and I'll also have success criteria. In other words, what are they going to be able to do at the end of the lesson that they couldn't do at the start, or the end of a lecture that they couldn't do at the start? Okay, it's a way of proving what they're doing. So that's important. We have to accept that students are unlikely to be perfect first time. They need to, find out where their deficiencies lie. And look, there's multiple ways of doing that. Sometimes it's just having a chat to their, person sitting beside them. Sometimes you can do as a group exercise. Sometimes you may want to do a quick pop quiz at formal test. But it's far better to find out early on that things are going wrong and changing your activity, rather than forging on with 3/4 of your class having no idea what you're talking about. This makes no sense whatsoever. So, these things are really, really important. Any misconceptions that they may have need to be confronted and corrected. And teachers and other students themselves can be useful sources of feedback. And I think, in a university context, we don't do enough of that. Peer learning and peer support is actually really important. That concept there of teaching and learning activities, or TLA, you really want students to encourage awareness of their own knowledge construction. So, being able for them to reflect on what's going on, to show that they have the ability to demonstrate adaptive expertise, to know that they know the material. And again, I'll reiterate what I said before, the best way to truly prove that you know something is to teach it to somebody else. That's going to help them. And being able to develop opportunities where students demonstrate that they are able to self-monitor and self-direct their own learning is the key to that whole concept of lifelong learning. As I say, one thing to have the knowledge, another thing entirely to be able to use it. So I guess that is really key to this as well. And I recommend this text, John Biggs and Catherine Tang, Teaching for Quality Learning at University. It's a very powerful text, and that's a quick summary from a couple of the chapters there. So I will just close that down and go back here and try and find the right screen as I try to maneuver myself out of here again. We're there, and I've got it now. Hang on, I'm just going to get my mouse over to the third screen, and we are done. So just looking at the time, I've gone over slightly there, sir, but that pretty much covers where I'm at. So I hope that you were able to, first of all, understand me. I know I've used a few sort of New Zealander-isms in there, but I'm sure that will be okay. And I would just like to, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be able to work with you in whatever form this takes. And Mr. Zoll, it's lovely to see you. I'm very, very happy if people are interested in something or want a bit more clarity, or there is some questions that people may ask at some stage. I'm very happy to respond via email or throw some more resources at you. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Stuart Wise, for your time and for your sharing of knowledge here. Don't worry about the language. I guess most of the lecturers are as wise as you.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
And yeah, the sessions is part of the young lecturers, which most of them actually graduated from United Kingdoms and New Zealand and Australia university. So most of them are very competent. So just that to have such and very experienced lecturers giving talks here today is very honor for us. And I give it kind of giving them a bit of reminiscence, remembering the past.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah.
And then of course for me, because I'm also I used to study in New Zealand previously, and I went to Christchurch once before that, and then so this connection with University of Canterbury and with you is very I mean it's good to reconnect back to the memory.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yep. That's
It's
great.
Before we go, I just like to refresh a few points here from your speech here. Just for the audience later on. Okay, a few points that have been mentioned here by Dr. Stuart is constructivism, multiple intelligence, lifelong learnings, develop and change and evolve, adaptability, and critics and questions, and of course being a positive influence to students, giving empathy, giving a lot of empathy towards the students that we teach. There's a few points that I could pick up from these talks given by Dr. Stuart. And as mentioned before this, it seems that the 40 minutes, the 1 hour session here is not, it's just nice and it's not enough for some of them perhaps. So they might have some question later on. So I will advise the audience to gather some questions, and then I will email to you questions to get.
Of course.
And also I just got one final question, since is in relations to technological usage now, since it's a COVID-19 pandemic now, is all over the world, and you see yourself, how do you cope the teaching and learning process during this pandemic year?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, and it has been very challenging. I mean, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this. What we found was that our college ended up supporting many of the other colleges in their approaches to online teaching. And in the end, what we found was most difficult was the traditional lab sort of subjects. So for our engineers, it's been hugely problematic. Our scientists have really struggled to be able to cope with the practical sides of things. But even within that, we worked out, first of all, you know, the length of time that people can actually cope on the screen isn't that long. And to be able to pull it down into short bite-sized chunks has been really important. We've found that little bite-sized things are more important. We acknowledged that we used a lot more of what we call a blend in our teaching, so that there might be an email going out saying, I'm going to be talking about these particular papers, we need you to read this. And then when you came there, the lecturer wasn't lecturing per se, they were operating in a far more tutorial sort of construct. So that worked pretty well. We learned to be able to use YouTube and these other things very strongly. I mean, a really good example here, Mr. Zool, is we have a fantastic lecturer in volcanology. He's in our geography department.
Okay.
And Ben Kennedy is just amazing. He's won a tertiary teaching award. And he uses VR, virtual reality, even in the online space. For example, 3D cameras. And you may be aware that we had a very bad accident in Whakaari White Island in the North Island last year. It was a group of tourists on a volcanic island, which exploded and a number were killed. Yeah, well, Ben's actually been up there when lockdown was off, and he's actually flown his camera via a drone over the volcano and right into the crater. And he was able, these kinds of things using 3D camera capture and putting those clips in. So yes, a high level of technology, but as he said, to make it incredibly realistic. And yes, we know it's resource intensive and those kinds of things, but that's just an example of some of the innovative stuff we've used. Just good teaching practice things, which we said before, like I mentioned before, clear learning outcomes. This is what we're covering today. These are the success criteria. This is what you need to do beforehand. Putting the onus back on the students that they have to make an effort to engage in this. And that was certainly one of the things that we did. So, just trying to model what's always been good teaching practice, but just put it in a slightly different online context. But I think overall, my experience of it was actually saying to the students, look, I'm going to be here at a particular time. And, little things, we were just laughing about this before. I was working at home. I'd show them my dogs, just that sort of personal touch. And before too much longer, we had other people with their pets, and that relationship stuff was actually really important. So that was really helpful. Acknowledging, look, wow, this is not what we expected. It's really good. I'll just add one other thing too. We have a generation of younger people now who are very technologically competent. And I think sometimes, my generation have been guilty of underestimating their skills and abilities. They're better problem solvers than we give them credit for. So we use the term in the research that I do around affordances, and they use devices in ways that we hadn't thought of. Those are some of the things which we have to be open to for their thinking. So I'm not sure if that answered it, but that's just some general thoughts about that. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Stuart, for the answers and the time given, share with us. We are very grateful again for your sharing sessions, and I'm personally, hopefully this is not our first time having these sessions, we still have UDL.
Yeah, the Universal Design for Learning. We could come back to that.
Thank you very much again, Doctor, for your time. We love with what you have shared today, and hopes to hear and receive good feedbacks from the audience. And before we go, we wish you to have a safe and it's being safe here right now, because it's always pandemic situation. So hopefully we pray for New Zealand and Malaysia. Hopefully the situation is getting better in the future, and we could reconnect physically later.
I hope so. Yes, you too. Hey, look, it's an absolute pleasure. Just lovely to see you, and very happy to help if I can. Okay. So, in Māori, ka kite anō. We'll see you again.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.